Welcome to Health Literacy Out Loud. I'm Helen Osborne, President of Health Literacy Consulting, founder of Health Literacy Month, and author of the book Health Literacy from A to Z. I also produce and host this podcast series that focuses on many aspects of health communication, patient education, and health literacy. Today's guest is Liz Seegert, who is an award-winning independent journalist. Liz has written about health for more than 30 years. Her main beats include aging, women's health, social determinants of health, and health policy. Liz's articles have appeared in dozens of national and local media outlets, including Scientific American, the American Journal of Nursing, and WebMD Medscape. Liz is the contributing editor on aging for the Association of Healthcare Journalists, or AHCJ. She also co-directs 2 fellowship programs, mentoring and training emerging journalists in aging and health reporting. I've read many of Liz's articles over the years. I always value what she writes, and I since had the pleasure of actually meeting her in person. I'm so glad, Liz, that you agreed to be a guest on Health Literacy Out Loud. Welcome.
Thank you, Helen. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm tickled by it, too. I think what grabs me in many of your articles, they're about people. They're not just kind of this happens and therefore that happens, or this percentage and, all that fact-based stuff. You have it in there. I know you're writing about real stuff, but it's the people part that grabbed me. You and I have since chatted a little bit, and you referred to that as narrative journalism. Now, that was a fairly new term for me because I'm not a journalist by trade. Clue us all in. I think we could all learn a lot from you.
Well, narrative journalism is essentially the kind of writing that includes some storytelling. And by that, I don't mean Hansel and Gretel type stories. I mean taking a character, taking a setting or a scene, using some vivid descriptive language to help add some relatability to your stories. A traditional journalism goes in an inverted pyramid. You give the main idea in your first couple of paragraphs, and then you fill in with details and a couple of expert quotes. And believe me, I do a lot of that. But there are many stories that also lend themselves as well or better when you include what I would call real people, as opposed to the policymakers, the academic experts, the people that are experiencing the results of whatever you're reporting about.
So, Liz, let me tell you about the listeners to Health Literacy Out Loud. Obviously, we could be anybody. Anyone can listen, and I hope they do. But for the most part, we're not journalists by training. We do writing and storytelling to get our bigger message across. So in this example of narrative medicine, which is inherent to you, you're a longtime journalist, can you give us an example of what that would be like?
Sure. You might start off with a character. Let's call her Jane Smith, 28. She lives with her 3-year-old daughter in a small but cozy 1-bedroom apartment in the suburbs of Atlanta. She's working 2 jobs, but she really wants to go back to school and become a nurse and make a better life for herself and her daughter. The problem is right now, Jane can't afford health insurance, even though she's working these 2 jobs. So she really relies on Medicaid to keep herself and her daughter healthy. However, the new budget bill, which was recently passed by Congress, is going to put an extra burden on Jane to keep that Medicaid. And she could lose both her health insurance and funding for her daughter's Head Start program. That's how you might get into a story, whether it's a journalistic story or a public health type of story or something you might put up on a website that makes this issue talking about the 2026 Medicaid budget, which is massive. That's how you make it relatable to an average person.
You got me right as you're starting to do that. I'm thinking, oh, I'm wondering what my next question will be for Liz. And then you like, I'm right there. I'm right there with that mom and her daughter and their iffy status, perhaps, of their health insurance. You grabbed me by doing that. Somewhere in that article, you will then add some of the facts. It's not going to be all about this woman, right?
Oh, absolutely. My next paragraph would probably go right into some of the policy issues. And then I would include a quote or two from an expert, whether that's policy or an advocacy group or something like that. I would absolutely bring in the facts, but this is what I might even consider a side door to explaining very, very complicated policy facts, because it's very hard to grasp what $1 trillion looks like. It's much easier to grasp what one single mom might be experiencing. It might be your next door neighbor. It might be, your colleague or the person you meet on the bus who's getting to work that way because maybe she can't afford to own a car. The point is to keep it relatable.
I have questions for you. I have questions for you as a journalist. Like, why did you choose this story and not somebody else's story? Other questions for us as writers who aren't experienced journalists like you. How long do we keep telling a story? When do we add the facts? What else should we know about bringing narrative journalism into our writing, whatever we're writing about for whatever health topic it is?
I think, I hate to say it, but it depends. If I'm doing an 800 or 1,000 word story, which is roughly 2 printed pages,
Okay.
I might just use snippets. I might use an anecdote about a person in the beginning of the story to kind of grab the reader in, fill in the middle with the facts and a couple of expert quotes, and then perhaps loop around and end the story on that person I introduced in the beginning.
Okay.
If it's a New Yorker length story,
You mean New Yorker magazine, so many
yes,
pages.
many multiple pages, 10,000, 20,000 words. That's the type of story where you would have more than one character, more than one situation, and you would weave that in throughout the entire article because an article of that length demands it. So, on a public health side or communication side, you might use one or two paragraphs to illustrate it, whatever the situation is.
And I'm also just thinking, Liz, for when many folks I know, and I remember from my hospital days, we might only have one side of a piece of paper, at the most two, or a little trifold thing. We're not dealing with much space.
Right.
I'm just curious, how do you balance the way of just bringing in the humanity and, your term was kind of hooking the reader, and making it real? How do you balance that with the fact-based stuff you have to put in there?
It's a balancing act. I agree. I think you've got to find the most compelling tidbits that really demonstrate whatever the message is that you are trying to get across. So it might be preventive screening, or it might be immunization, or it might be monitoring your A1C for diabetes. You can do that in a paragraph or two to make those bigger issues relatable to the people that are going to be reading or listening or watching your materials.
In that example, what was the whatever Jane Smith or whatever her name was, something went wrong, or something that potentially was going to go wrong. Do you, in your storytelling, when you have limited space with what's gone wrong, and then give facts about how to make it better? Or could you start about, here's what's going great with this mom and her child, and here's why? So do you start from what's going well and going backwards, or do you start with what the problem is and going forward?
It really depends on the kind of story I'm writing.
Okay. What about, let's say, for diabetes, for people newly diagnosed with diabetes? How might you bring in some narrative journalism to that? I'm putting you on the spot. I know that.
That's fine. Um, you could approach it one of two ways. For example, you could start with somebody getting diagnosed and not understanding what diabetes is or how it might affect their health. Or you could start the story with someone that has been managing their health successfully because they've gotten information and education. Perhaps they're attending classes, or perhaps they've seen a nutritionist, for example.
Ah,
So
okay.
you can decide which way you want to approach it. Is it for somebody who's newly diagnosed, who's perhaps never dealt with this situation before, doesn't understand it? Is it somebody that maybe has friends and family? Perhaps there's a family history. So they've seen what can happen to relatives. Perhaps somebody's had to, go through dialysis or lose, an amputation or something.
Any tips for how you choose which approach?
I think it really depends on what you're trying to get across. If your organization is touting a new diabetes education program, for example, you might want to start with the success story.
Okay.
If your aim is to educate people on the dangers of not monitoring your A1C, you might want to start with oh no, what do I do? What is this diabetes thing?
Okay. All right. So, what else should we be considering? And also, when you're telling a story, is it a true story?
In journalism, it has to be.
Oh, okay. So, Jane Smith is a real person who may or may not be named Jane Smith. Is that correct?
This is correct. She actually is somebody I learned about doing some reporting on this whole Medicaid problem. And I've taken a snippet of this situation. Obviously, I can't go into her whole story, but in journalism in particular, we are bound by journalistic ethics and practices. You can't make stuff up.
So, she's not just a generic stand in for someone who might be in that situation.
Not if I'm writing a straight journalism article. No, it absolutely can't be.
Do you need Jane's permission? And would we need Jane's permission if we're writing a brochure about diabetes and taking this scenario?
If you are using her full name and identifying information, then yes, I would err on the side of caution to get their permission, perhaps as a health communicator, perhaps even in writing.
Okay.
As a journalist, what I normally do with people I interview is I explain what I'm going to do, I explain where it's going to appear. And then I ask for them if it's okay if I record the conversation and explain, because many people who don't do this, the difference, and I'm sure many of your audience members do, but the difference between what they're telling me off the record and on the record is
Oh, meaning Jane would say, don't mention I have, two children, something else that's identifying or something like that. Would that be off the
exactly.
record? Okay.
As a journalist, both parties agree to this before the interview begins. You can't be doing an on the record interview and then somebody comes to you in the middle of their story and say, oh, no, no, don't use this part, because that's not how journalism works. So, particularly when I'm interviewing what I would like to call regular people, people that don't have much experience with journalists and who really don't understand the process, I will take extra time to explain that process, explain what I intend to use, whether that's personal details or their full name or direct quotes, those kinds of things. I have been asked, for example, don't print my hometown. If you notice in this example, I said a suburb of Atlanta, which is generic enough that it's not identifiable. If I was asked to use a pseudonym, Jane Smith, many times I will agree to it. Sometimes I have to get an editor involved. But if they feel, particularly if it's a situation where the person is vulnerable, for example, an older adult with dementia, I might just use their first name.
Okay.
Because you don't want to perpetuate any kind of vulnerability. You want to tell the story, but you also don't want to victimize a person or put them in a position where they could be victimized.
Okay. And did you already know ahead of time that this was the person you wanted to feature in your story as opposed to just talking to several people, giving them the same prep, and then you choose one?
In this particular case, I actually did because I had heard about her from a colleague. Many times I will just put a call out for people willing to speak with me, and journalists do this a lot. We either network with our colleagues or we might even put out a query on a platform like LinkedIn. And I've gotten sources that way as well. And again, I explain to them I will need to use your name, your personal details, your hometown, and that sort of thing. Some people decide that they don't want that and they back out, and that's perfectly fine. Some people are very happy to share their stories.
Okay.
So a lot of it is trial and error. A lot of it is helping them understand the process so they go into it fully informed.
Listening to this process, it is different. And I'm talking about like busy clinicians who are just asked to write a booklet on whatever disease or procedure it is. We've got a lot to be learning about this. I've got a few other questions, particularly to ask. And one is about kind of the ethics. You talked about that. Kind of what do we need to be considering in the ethics of bringing in some narrative journalism? And then my other question has to do about all those other people who are looking at what we write and have an opinion about it, whether it's our boss, whether it's our marketing department, whether it's our lawyers, editors who are changing that. So start wherever you want, kind of the ethics of doing this and all those other people who are trying to put their fingerprint on our writing.
Well, I think the ethics are pretty clear. You never should be exploiting anybody. The means does not justify the end. And that's especially true when you're dealing with people that are not used to being in the public eye. In a marketing campaign, I know that people will sometimes create a composite scenario, which is acceptable in non journalistic situations. You might have two or three people that share bits and pieces of their stories. And it makes a stronger narrative if you take elements from one and elements from the other. But you have to disclose that. You might use Jane Smith's name, but you might want to asterisk it and put a footnote at the bottom that says, her name has been changed to protect privacy or something. So I believe in full disclosure, regardless of how you approach it. When it comes to being edited, and
Right.
I've been edited by many, many people over many years, just like in any situation, there are good editors and there are bad editors, and most of them are pretty good.
Okay. I like editors. Don't love them all, but I think my
Exactly.
writing is better with a good editor.
I think a good editor's worth their weight in gold, personally. But there are people that want to make changes for the sake of making changes that don't necessarily make the story you're telling, regardless of whether it's straight journalism or a marketing piece, better. They just feel like, well, I'm getting paid to review this, so I should do something. I'm sure many
You're
of us
funny.
have
Yeah.
been there.
Yeah. I can relate. Yeah.
My feeling is if it materially changes the tone or the message of the story angle, then I think it's incumbent upon the writer to push back. If it's a change that really doesn't matter, it's maybe they substitute out a synonym for a particular word or want to reorder a couple of paragraphs, but it doesn't materially change the nature of the story you're trying to tell. I tend to mostly let that go. I've learned over the years kind of what's worth putting my stake in the ground for and what's not, or, I'd never get any story published.
Liz, I'm learning so much from you. I hope our listeners are learning. I'm sure they're learning a lot too. What a joy. You are talking about narrative journalism and how that brings in the people part, how it brings in the story. And that's exactly what you did with us, with me, talking with me on this podcast. I thank you so much. No wonder your writing is a joy to read. Liz, thank you so much for being a guest on Health Literacy Out Loud.
Thank you so much for having me, Helen. This was fun.
As we just heard from Liz Seegert, writing health information in a compelling way brings in many skills and talents, and there's a lot to learn from journalism as they bring in narrative journalism to our work. But writing clearly and compelling health information is not always easy. For help clearly communicating your health message, please take a look at my book, Health Literacy from A to Z. Feel free to also explore my website, healthliteracy.com, or contact me directly at Helen, Helen, at healthliteracy.com. New Health Literacy Out Loud interviews come out the first of every month. Get them all for free by subscribing at healthliteracyoutloud.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please help spread the word about Health Literacy Out Loud. Together, let's tell the whole world why health literacy matters. Until next time, I'm Helen Osborne.